So that's the new shepherd school building that we are repairing, and then there's the library and the classroom, and that's the summer bedroom, and this is the shepherd school students' house.
In 1994, a flock of sheep took to the centre of Madrid, led by Jesus Garzón. People gawped as thousands of merino sheep passed in and out of pavements and roads, typically frequented by hordes of vehicles rather than herds of livestock. A reminder that prior to being a runway of asphalt, this land was walked by shepherds moving their livestock through the country to reach their seasonal pastures. Jesus was raising awareness of a practice called transhumance, the seasonal act of moving livestock to and from summer highlands and winter lowlands, helping to avoid severe temperatures. In 1995, a law was passed by the Spanish government to protect the nationwide network of ancient paths historically utilised by shepherds to carry out this migration. These run across 125,000 kilometres, known as vías pecuarias in Spain, or livestock ways in English. The law declared them as public property and therefore imprescriptible, inalienable, and inembargable. Ecologists also refer to them as ecological corridors, which can provide a refuge for plants and animals. In large part due to Jesus' desire to re-enchant Spain with its shepherding culture, a transhumance festival was born, and since his stunt in 1994, thousands of sheep pass through Madrid every year at the end of October. This event makes visible the neglected livestock pathways and the people still working with transhumant practices, not only in Spain, but across the world. Transhumance, which comes from the Latin trans for across and humus for earth, is thought to go as far back as the year 923. Its persistence is due to the people who continued traditions of pastoralism within a landscape of shifting land ownership structures. The European Shepherding Network states that land grabbing and the restrictions on mobility make it impossible to maintain a viable pastoralist system. Pastoralists live and work across Europe, from the Arctic tundra to the Mediterranean and Black Sea, from northern European lowlands to the mountains of the Alps and Carpathians. Herding cultures include crofters, transhumants, nomadic herders, and other extensive forms of livestock farming of sheep, cattle, goats, and reindeer, with the native, locally adapted breeds having an important role in these practices. Spain remains the only country with a network of legally protected roads for the movement of herds. Nevertheless, pastoralism encounters obstacles in many forms, including a crisis of generational renewal and diversity. In Spain, where rural depopulation is on the rise, some people are getting self-organised and offering each other mutual support and training opportunities to make pastoral livelihoods more accessible. This includes the Women's Livestock Farmers of Catalonia, which in 2018 was founded to promote extensive livestock farming from a feminist and anti-capitalist perspective. To promote the future of this relational livelihood, shepherding schools for exchanging knowledge and applied practices are growing in numbers, scales and territories. Neoliberal market values are significantly influencing the food economies that shepherds have to compete in and make their living from. Intensive industrial models of raising livestock and transforming labour into produce for the market are challenged by many pastoralists who believe in a different cultural system of production in the countryside. Could new shepherd schools help make space for collective action, new modes of participation and transformation? Can they help us think through the ways to reclaim ecological relationships of commoning when surrounded by enclosures both material and ideological? Today we're visiting Fernando Garcia Dory to talk through these ideas. Fernando is deeply engaged with rural traditions of shepherding. As did Jesus Garzón, he wants to demystify society to the careful relations between nature and culture, to challenge misconceptions around extensive modes of livestock farming. The interview took place in the luscious green mountains of northern Spain in a very old hamlet, where Fernando founded inland Campo Adentro. Its creation was based on a 3-word manifesto: art, agriculture, territory. His ecological pedagogy includes taking his flocks to towns and creating flock forest classrooms in cities. But his approach is international and extends beyond borders. We speak with Fernando about reclaiming territory, shepherd schooling, art, emotion, identity, and the plural imaginaries of the future of extensive agriculture. It's important to mention as well that when I did this interview with Fernando, we were sat outside, and during this time, Fernando and some of the land workers were processing plums. So there's additional background noise of grass streamers, dogs barking, but hopefully you can still enjoy the interview and feel like you're participating in our chat.
Inland is a bit like a vehicle for people who want to get closer to the land and also to experiment with culture and art, to develop those potentials. Which means that the different people who are engaging now in inland have different levels of participation and decision making and so on. We usually tend to say that we follow a village-centric meritocracy, in the sense that those who spend more time and dedicate more in the village, they, let's say, have more of a participation in the core group of the association, rather than if you choose to be like a, let's say, more of a cultural production staff person. That is the case also sometimes for people who stay in Madrid and then they work in the space we have there more for management and things like that. So far in the village here, it's me, Grace Gloria, and then there is Guillermo, that was living here, but now because he has two kids, moved to the village down the hill where they can go to school. And then there is Laureano and Luismi, who are like a building ministry, and they are from the area and they are carrying their mom, who is in another village down there. So yeah, and then there's like temporary inhabitants, like now Valentina and LA, and more people is coming. When we arrived here, I had a family connection with the main house, but this was all going to be sold, so we decided to start to acquire it as inland. But then you see that mostly the economical perspective that are projected for mountain areas in the region is tourism. So the fact that we try to think on what was the traditional form of a diversified production. So for example, this sort of what we call the farmholds, no, in this area would have bees, apple production and cider, so a little bit of everything. And in our case, we are also trying to focus more on the cheese production as main source of economy. But yeah, the idea is that you don't go to the land just to make a bubble and live, you know, within your own parameters, but try to make what we call an agroecological lighthouse, or a space that can eventually serve as a learning opportunity. No? So that's why we like to think on this sort of village lab, where we are trying different things. For example, we started to build a wood pavilion that will be to study the process of reconverting all this forest that is eucalyptus monoculture that happened in Spain in the Franco's time, that the introduction of eucalyptus, and how to go back to the Atlantic forest that is oak tree, chestnut, another salix, I don't know how you say.
Salix or willow. What's the relation between Franco and the eucalyptus?
So in the 20s, on the beginning of the century, the rural Europe was arriving to a sort of point of no return in terms of claims by the peasant groups, and classes, because you have to think that in Spain, for example, the way of living in the land has been almost the same since Quixote and Cervantes till the early 20s, no, in the sense of access to technology, economy and so on. So there was not really like an early industrial revolution as it happened in the UK. So all that discontent in terms of belonging to a society that was in many ways still having very conservative aspects was exploding. And then in many parts of Spain, the anarchist farmers movement was very strong. So you have the FIE and CNT and other unions that were starting to talk about collectivizing land, and especially in the south, where there is like the big landowners and big estates. Going back farther back in history, the upper half of Spain is very much where the early Christian kingdoms started to settle after the Arab conquest in the 8th century. So which means that from the 8th century till the 14th century, those Christian kingdoms in the Middle Ages were hardly being able to push southwards, and then the way in which they managed to, let's say, gather their armies was by granting every soldier a piece of land. So that's why in the north of Spain you have like a very equal distribution of land property, and actually that many families have even coat of arms of being like a signal as early, let's say, combatants for those Christian kingdoms. While when the so-called Reconquest started to move southwards towards Granada, the way in which the kings granted the land was through military orders and big estates for the aristocracy. Which means that in the south of Spain, you have a testing site for what was later exported to America.
because it was the moment almost where Columbus reached America, and then the idea of the haciendas and that you would have a big estate with landless farmers started to be tested in Andalusia and Extremadura. That's why the farmers' movement in the south of Spain are very strong, as they were in the south of Italy. And that's why those uprisals and dangers that I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Those uprisals were seen as a sort of a menace for the status quo, and that's why they say that the civil war in Spain was actually, let's say, a pioneering reaction of both the army, the land tenant classes, and the church. So that's what you had, a fascist movement, uprisal, that really created a situation of civil war, and then it stopped all those movements. And actually that happened later in Europe, when you see what Mussolini capitalized. No? He did some agrarian reforms in Italy, or actually in Germany. The socialist Rosa Luxemburg and the communists were really strong before the Nazis. So that was a moment of, let's say, responding to that social unrest. And then after the war, what you have in the West is like a way to mitigate maybe a pendular movement again to the left. So in the UK, you have quite a socialist moment that has to be like driven through the idea of more than rights to the workers, welfare and holidays and your little car and your little house, and then that's what started to happen. And in the case of Franco's Spain, of course, he stayed in power. So the years after of Franco, that were 30, he started a process also of trying to organize land questions, and also respond to the need of what we call the desarrollismo, the developmentism, in which means that many millions of people moved from rural areas in Spain to the cities, and then that involves making the commons to be, let's say, enclosed, or so in the many areas of the mountains of Spain where the land was commons. Franco created the Icona, that was like an institute, I don't remember the acronym, and then the plans of reforesting all those open forests, grasslands and mountain pastures with two main species, pine tree for central Spain and then the eucalyptus in the north.
The institute that Fernando mentions, the Institute for the Conservation of Nature, or ICONA, which existed between 1971 and 1995 and was a Spanish administrative body for the conservation of nature. After Spain's civil war, the Spanish fascist dictator Francisco Franco launched a reforestation plan using eucalyptus trees in the name of replacing the forests ravaged by the conflict and because of the trees' economic value.
So actually in the mountains of Madrid, it was a huge shepherding area with many, many flocks, and it was all, let's say, suppressed, because if you couldn't take your sheep anymore to the mountain because it has been enclosed to make a forested plantation, then you end up moving to the city, and that's what happened, that Bilbao, Barcelona, Madrid grew in millions of people, and all those commons become like forested areas. And so here in the north there was the interest to try to promote trees for quick production, quick growth, fast growing trees for paper pulp. And that's a big industry, and actually now Portugal, north of Spain, northwest, has the biggest production of paper of the whole Europe. And there are more hectares of eucalyptus globulus than in Australia. So yeah, it's huge. And actually there was these days a protest in Galicia against a new paper plant. But here what we see is that it's very resilient to fire, so it ends up being the one that grows after a fire. And that's why what we are trying now is to go back to the other forest that of course has a higher biodiversity, because more birds can nest on these trees, and you have also possibility of having pasture in between. And then the idea is to have a sort of an open agro-silvopastoral system, and rethink on those new commons, how we can rethink commons, and also how we can rethink rewilding, because I think that's a big debate now in Europe, and I think that urban classes that of course are huge, because in the case of Europe and probably in the US, we're talking about 3-4% of the population working in the land. So all the vast majority of people have lost that connection with the land, and then they just think that, okay, let's have forests everywhere. But that could be the same problem I just described. That is like, where and when do you plant, how and with whom, And then we see that in the pastoralist movement, many pasture areas are being just, removed and people displaced, because of this sort of romanticization of the forest as the only form of nature, and and then the idea of rewilding. I think that actually has to do with, let's say, the guiltiness of the person who lives in the city that thinks, okay, we better give back to nature. But then when you read how the rewilding big NGOs are reclaiming land, it's sometimes very perverse, because they said, okay, well, people are leaving the land anyway, so it's empty. So then we can just fence it and then bring wild herbivores, and then we introduce carnivores, and we have like a sort of a Jurassic Park or European Serengeti. But then you're really depriving the possibility of food sovereignty and a future for the young people who want to live in the land.
So I wondered how you feel in the shepherding community around the discussion with the wolf, whether you believe there's possibility for solidarity between these large carnivores and shepherding.
Yeah, well, yeah, as you said, it's a huge debate. And what can I say? I mean, I don't think that any of the shepherds I've met and work with are for extermination of the species. But we have to consider that above the Duero River, it's not even an endangered species. Mm-hmm. We're talking maybe about 4,000, 5,000 individuals. So it's not that it's going to disappear. It's actually enlarging the population. In many cases, they extended to areas where shepherding was a primary activity, but of course the number of shepherds declined. So then the shepherds extend, and then if there is a regulation that avoids them to have any capacity of like control or keeping areas that are more for shepherding and areas that are more like the top of the mountains for the wolves, then it ends up them paying the bill. So when you see it from the perspective of a shepherd who has maybe 70 sheep because they are milking them, and it has a very specific value in terms of getting to know the animals, the lineage and so on, and then in one night a couple of wolves can kill 35 sheep. But it's, as a shepherd was telling me, it's like if I take your laptop and smash it. It's not the object itself, it's the information it has and the value of what you gathered there, and say is the genetics and so on. So yeah, I think that you have a lot of bureaucratical difficulties and control. You have markets that don't recognize the price of a lamb that is free and a pastoralist lamb against industrial meat and the livestock that is just intensive. Then you have less access to services in the rural, schools, transport, culture. And then on top of that, you have predators extending. And the new episode is because we see now that there is a new mosquito due to the climate change that is affecting livestock. So at the end, how we can say that we want to regenerate the countryside and have young people coming back and so on, when all the factors are just making it so difficult instead of having a red carpet. And the thing is that when you talk to the environmentalists, first of all, they have a very dismissive attitude in like saying the shepherds, they get a lot of money from the European Union and they don't do well their job. This is what they end up saying, because they say if they were by the sheep, the wolf wouldn't attack, but they want just to be in the bar and then leave the sheep alone. And it's like, well, first of all, you don't understand that if you make cheese, you have to milk the animals in the morning and then you cannot be with the sheep and making the cheese. So traditionally you would leave the sheep like being roaming free, and this is what keeps alpine pastures and many other environmental benefits, prevention of fires, fertilization of soil. There will be amphibians going to the places where the sheep are kind of cleaning, and fountains. So there is a huge wildlife diversity associated, including wolves. And it's not bad that the wolf eats one or two. It's just that the axe is what is putting people like just in constant stress because they cannot sleep. You're always wondering. For us, even was a problem because it was November when we were got two sheep killed, and then we had to put all the sheep to sleep inside the stable since November till May, which means that they could have been sleeping in the field or in the mountain. Better for the mountain, better for them in healthy terms, because it's better that they sleep outdoors when there is no cold, and also better for us because we don't need to be cleaning hours and hours of stable manure. And at the end, we have to just close them every night. But just to answer about the environmentalists, sometimes an argument you hear a lot is when they say, well, first of all, they don't take care well of the sheep, and second, if they had just mastiff dogs, there won't be a problem. So the interviews that you see in the newspapers and things like that about shepherds that are very happy with the wolves, there is one in Zamora that was like the shepherds I know were laughing because he had like 35 dogs. 35 dogs. I mean, you need a truck of food to give that, and then you are herding dogs, not herding sheep or cows. So, and then of course he's like the one that is like by journalists because the public opinion state is not very much focused on that side. say like, let's meet this shepherd who is so happy with his dogs and how they protect the cattle. It's like, well, yeah, because the cattle is dogs.
So I guess going backwards a little bit, if maybe you'd like to talk a bit about what it means for you personally to be a shepherd today, and also how you feel it's valued in the current economic system and growth-driven economy.
In the most biographical sense, my father had cows, and then I grew up a little bit close to the land, and so I was always interested. But then I felt that the pastoralist culture in the mountains is like a different one, in the sense that it's much more sophisticated in terms of reading the landscape, understanding the animals, seeing how things are going to happen. They spend a long time by themselves in the mountains, and there is like a specific language. So I was willing to learn more. I saw that there were like only 8 shepherds left from 1,000, so there was a lot of knowledge and management that was going to be lost. Those numbers apply to many other areas. The huge decrease on pastoralists, of course, because it's a form of life it's a kind of a big indicator. When you lose the shepherd of the village and the shepherds start to decrease, it's like showing you that the whole farming system is changing and disappearing. But so I wanted the chance to learn, because I saw many people in the late 90s that were interested in going back to the land, but in a very romantical way, no? Like, I want to have my animals and so on. But then the fact of really having the chance to learn how it is every day, when you have to deal with the different weathers, when you have to deal with different health situations of the flock, or there's no holidays, it was important to give a little bit of a realistic dimension to the trade for those who want to try, because then they can do it with full knowledge instead of attempting and then being in a more difficult situation with. So that's why the shepherd school started in 2004, and I don't consider I myself learned enough to train as much as a veteran shepherd does, who has done her own life. At some point I was working with the shepherd's movement as well, and I was telling them, look, till I have my sheep, I think it's better I'm not longer a spokesperson for the movement or something. And then the shepherds were telling me, well, actually it's important that you do also this sort of mobilization, communication and so on, and part pastoralist, because this is also what we need, no? And I remember the Maasai people in Tanzania, there was one community, and then one young member of the community was like a born a little bit too slim or too small, no? And then all the Maasai people from that community sold cows and gathered funds to send him to London to study law, and then he came back to serve the community as a lawyer for their land cases and so on. So that tells you a little bit also that, in this case I think that in my case I have to keep that sort of so far bipolar situation of having to work on the communication and cultural aspects and organizing the shepherd school. So sometimes it's more like shepherding shepherds. So why I think pastoral is important. Because I connected to this land, to this area, and this area is primarily pastoralist. I mean, what you have in mountain areas, what you have in arid lands, in the tundra, is not agriculture. You cannot just have crops. There are many areas of the world that are actually feeding 250 million of people that rely on pastoralist systems. So it's the only source to make use of scarce resources, or actually here scarce in the sense that you have little plots of land in a very hilly area that would be difficult to transform into arable land, and then weather conditions. Here, for example, the people were not having even bread. They had to eat acorn flour bread because of the rain makes the fructification of the cereals not possible. So then, when you go to the alpine systems of Switzerland or Italy, you go to the Pyrenees, you go to many areas where just animal pastoralist systems were the ones that thrived and then allow us to gain in food sovereignty, which is very important in moments of further industrialization and globalization of the food system with very few corporate actors.
Can you quickly explain your definition of food sovereignty?
Yes, I think that is the right and the possibility for peoples and communities to choose and pursue the food system that they want, the way to produce foods, the way to live in the land and from the land, and to gain autonomy and not to be subject to markets or farming policies. Certainly not prioritized by the current status quo. Because if you look at it, what Via Campesina is proposing is exactly the opposite of capitalist globalization. And then it's very hard that the establishment accepts it, because it involves like having the indigenous people's view of the world, the idea of harmony with the others and with nature, and it also takes for present economy the fact of small production, carrying land, not sacrificing everything for trade, food not being a commodity. So all that is hardly acceptable for governments that are part of the WTO and that are signing agreements for free trade. And at the end, this is what the business wants, not like to have 3,000 cows in a big farm in Rotterdam to produce soy in Brazil where it's cheap, and then import those soybeans and then have the protein just given to the animals, like a industrial logic. So for them, pastoralism is actually very, very, awkward, no? Because you cannot really control them, you don't know where they are, you don't know the animals. So I think that pastoralists in the world, either in the Iranian tribes of the Qashqai or the Mongolian nomads and so on, are sort of an in-between, in between the hunter-gatherer and the farmer, that very much based on, let's say, carrying the land, but lightly.
The present mode of production and who it's feeding, would you say that your community here and also the shepherds that you know in the region are able to sort of feed their community?
I mean, traditionally, the families and the communities here were very self-reliant. You would hardly need anything else than some coffee, rice, and almost that's all. Because most of the products were animal products. So then with a pig, you would eat the meat the whole year. So it's like mostly an animalist diet here. And in that way, also something I found very interesting is the ways of mutual support. So when I would arrive here at the beginning, I would have like the pantry filled of chorizo, of things that the people would be bringing. But of course, this has been an evolution, and then there is less and less philosophy of feeding yourself or the family, but more specializing in a certain production. And with the cheese, you have, of course, added value. Because at the end, the cows are very reliant on the payments by the European Union. So this is also an area that we saw very much changing due to the different agrarian policies of Europe. So till the 60s, 70s, it was that form of polyculture, polyproduction, self-reliance. But then in the 60s, 70s, the dairy industry started to push. The introduction of the Holstein cows and the increased production of milk. But then, of course, there was the milk wars, no? The big supermarkets and starting to push for lower prices. So my neighbor actually was doing his taxes. He was earning 200 euros a month working from sun to sun, and it was being paid like around 20 cents a liter of milk. So it was like, of course, for that producing under costs. And that's the same in Wales, that's the same everywhere. So yes, I don't know if I wouldn't say that the people now are feeding themselves completely. We all go to the supermarket and buy more things, but at least let's see that, and by keeping that tissue of small farmers, you have a certain resilience to go back to a system that is more adapted to the situation and the reality here, no? Because the problem is that now we have a food system that is totally not adapted to the conditions. It's relying on a lot of inputs you bring in, and let's say artificial production conditions that based on fossil fuels, and that make them also very vulnerable.
And what do you think we can learn from mobile pastoralism or other modes of pastoralism today in terms of relationships with the land?
Well, something also interesting about pastoralism that I mentioned before is that if you are a young person and want to start to live in the land, but you cannot afford to buy a farm or something, there is also the possibility of using, let's say, what is called marginal lands and common lands. And people who have been in shepherd school and started to live in the area or in other places, when they didn't have resources to start with land and so on, there are the chances that you can have like your own flock, and then you make use of what is left from arable crops, no, like the rest of the harvest, plus mountain areas and so on. So there is an important aspect of producing no nutritious foods and healthy food with available resources that otherwise wouldn't be used. No, so it's very efficient in that sense. And secondly, I think it teaches you to be co-responsible and politically engaged in managing resources instead of the very passive way we are used to. We could run a square in a city as a commons, or the water, or software.
I also asked a student at Inland Campo Adentro what their motivations were for pursuing a career in shepherding, and also what lesson we could learn in terms of revalorizing relationships between humans and the land.
My name is Lisa Watt, and I'm from California. And despite being from a city, I'm really interested in becoming a shepherd. I think that my interest in becoming a shepherd started when I was 16, and I went to a semester school called the Mountain School, which was focused on sustainable agriculture and developing a relationship with the land. And part of my curriculum at that school was working on the farm, and something that I was really impressed by, and that was really different from living in a city while I was there, was the relationship with the landscape and the changing seasons and the changes in the animals, to understand what our work should be, looking towards weather patterns to understand when to weed or when not to weed, or looking for animal behavior to understand when they should be fed, when they should be moved from pasture to pasture. And from that school, I became interested in regenerative grazing. A lot of land around the world is desertified because of exploitative agricultural practices over a long period of time, and there are a lot of regenerative grazing efforts to promote landscape health, but actually reverse desertification and bring back landscapes that have been diminished through these industrial agricultural management styles. I think that shepherding really appeals to me because it really relies on having to look towards the landscape for guidance on how you should be treating your animals and how you should be moving through your ecosystems, to focus on cycles of rest and regrowth when you're thinking about moving animals from pasture to pasture. And I think that one of the problems with industrial agriculture is the destruction of the relationships between farmers and their animals. I think it's really hard to have those relationships when the animals are being seen as units of production, because your incentive is profit or production, especially in really huge agricultural setups. And if you have like hundreds or thousands of animals, how are you going to have intimate relationships with the animals and understand minute changes in behavior and things like that within a flock or a herd? And so I think that shepherding really encourages sustainable relationships with the landscape, because you have to be so focused on landscape health in order to maintain the health of your animals and therefore your livelihood. And I think that shepherding has a really important role in today's world. There's a really big movement to return back to this slower type of agriculture, restoring these relationships with land and with animals. Sheep are pretty unique in their production of wool, and I think that there's a lot of sustainability potential for wool, both in the fashion industry and for alternatives to different inputs on farms, like using wool in garden beds rather than using pesticides, or using wool as insulation in houses rather than synthetic materials.
I'm assuming, please tell me if I'm wrong, that this land itself is actually privately owned, but that you're managing it and valuing it as a common in the way that you're doing your activities and bringing people here and sharing it as something more than just your own property. So I wondered how you navigate this paradox of having to buy land to then common it.
I started squatting land when I was like 18, and then it was very difficult. We got evicted. So with a friend of mine who was also squatting, he said at the end, it's better to buy and secure than to just pretend not to be part of the transference of custody of land, that at the end puts you in a position of not being able to project long term. So then, we didn't really have a debate about buying, not buying. I know that for some people that's a debate. It's also true that it's different maybe if you're in indigenous lands, no? So traditionally here everybody has a small property. And that's not necessarily bad. I think that we sometimes grow up with discourses that are like very radical idealistic in certain senses, in the sense that peasant societies here work with, let's say, concentrical circles of property. So next to your house you would have a garden that would be like a very private way of owning land, because there was like that space of more, let's say, family run and owned land. Then there were the field, and that field in particular where the sheep are was a field that part of the year would be private and part of the year would be common. And that's interesting. And then there were the mountains that were commons. So yes, I don't know if we are ready to say, let's make all the property commons, because then you need a rule for that. I mean, commons is not just to say free beer. No? Commons is a very sophisticated way of handling something between a community of caretakers. No? So I think that so far what we're trying is at least to reach a point in which we have enough people living here that can live from the land and that can take care of the place. So I think that we have realized that maybe with the resources we have, there could be like around, I don't know, 8, 10 people. But then, yeah, for us, the commitment to the commons, it relies with the historical commons in the upper mountains. So to make use of them, to take part in the common cleaning of paths. The other day there was a call, so everyone who uses the commons have to go and clean a fountain or something. So this communal works, the way decision making is happening and so on. I guess that's like the commitment, no? In the sense that here we still have that traditional form of mixed properties, as I said. But I don't know if it would be a little bit too adventurous to say, now we make also common everything, because there is already a lot of commons, and then everybody's owning later like a couple of hectares, as I said, since the early Middle Ages, no, for their own. So yeah, we are dealing with the debate. Yeah.
I saw that you contributed to a book called Seasonal Matters, Rural Relations. It was exploring how to reconsider contemporary rural challenges through the lens of relationships rather than oppositions. And it got me thinking a bit about a common opposition that tends to appear in these spaces is around the rural-urban divide. I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how you interpret this.
Well, about that book also refers to the seasonal workers that come to Europe from Eastern Europe or Northern Africa to work in industrial farming. And then, yeah, that's, of course, creating the feeling of them against us. So it's important to look at this question. And then the divide rural-urban is growing. The way in which we tackle this question in inland is by having a space in the city and by bringing the sheep there and by trying to flow in the members and in the activities from the city to the land and so on. But in broader terms, I think it's a difficult, complex question because the people in the countryside feel they were sacrificed for the city. And it has some reason on it. I mean, let's say that, the politics, the economics and so on is privileging the city as a space of extraction, as a space of concentration of population and so on. So the farming sector and the rural people, they feel they are paying their taxes and being part of a society that actually is like constantly down looking at them. And then that creates a sort of resentment at the end, and that resentment and discontent is being now exploited by the far right. And that's something that is very worrying because it's hard to tackle unless there is a progressive discourse and practice that occupies that space of dissent or of unrest. And I don't see it happening. The far left in Spain did very, very poor with the rural. People from Podemos were just, I don't know, not understanding anything. We're coming from the vegan, animalist perspective, and then, getting it all wrong, and then at the end, I don't know what it happens now. And so in the rest of Europe, you see or even the UK vote for Brexit was very much really with rural areas, people voting Trump, and then that it's another turn of the screw on the spiral of disdain of the, let's say, liberal professional classes of the city towards the rural. And there is no discourse from the left that is saying, for example, well, the future of the rural is also to be a space of welcoming the other, a space that is hosting, a space of caring nature and reproducing economies, reproductive economies, a space for the growth, a space for good life. No? And then what the far right is just saying is like, well, your problem is that these people that don't understand you, they just want an environmental agenda that is making your life more difficult, all this bullshit of the climate change, and environmentalists. So basically at the end, they end up bringing the farmers and the rural people into a position of extreme conservadorism. And I don't think in nature the rural is like that. It's just that it has to be articulated otherwise. I mean, I don't see any of my neighbors, in the micro relation, the micro politics, don't think that anybody wants racist, supremacist, authoritarian government. It's just that it's kind of offers a solution to.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
And I tell you that I have to do that because, for example,
Yeah.
we are part of the European Shepherds Network. That is an entity with many farmers, shepherds organizations from around Europe, of many diverse. Because when you go to the real shepherding, in the sense that I'm a mix, no? I studied in the city, was brought in, grow up in a rural context, but also elsewhere, and then part of our context. I mean, not the, let's say, the more usual, sort of rural subject. But what I wanted to say is that in the Shepherds Union, they often say, we leave politics aside. We are here to protect pastoralism. So I don't mind if you vote socialist or you vote the right. So then in the European Shepherds Union, I wanted to bring up the debate of what is our position regarding the farmers' protests that happen in Europe presently. And I just had to be diplomatic because I might be members of the European Shepherds Union that were in the protests and are totally buying this discourse. So you cannot say so easily like, yeah, you have to be just working within the thing. And they're saying like, what do you think about, for example, how in some cases the protests were instrumentalized by populist, authoritarian ideologies. So yeah, in the case of Spain, it's very, very, very changing very much from region to region.
Yeah.
But here in the region, I could notice in the last years how pastoralists and shepherds that were traditionally just either apolitical or more towards the left, they're going more to the right. But in the case of Spain, it's also connected with the fact of Catalonia and independentism, and then people in the region, in this region, they say they are nationalists without a flag, without a nation.
That's interesting. How do you practice decision making in your project that you have here, and thinking about community and connection and governance, I suppose? I know that you are also part of, is it called the Confederacy of Villages or something like this?
Well, Confederacy Villages is more of a network, like a sort of a project of like-minded projects in Europe that combine art and agroecology. One of them is a very good one in the Lake District. It's called Rice Arts. The other one is in the south of Italy, in Puglia. The other one is northern Sweden, and there's one in Armenia. We all share the interest in working on the rural, but also not just as a subject, but also in practice. And then, there are different levels of participation of those political spaces. Here, for example, there is this hamlet, the inland village, that actually, this could be a network of households, but it's a very, let's say, internal space, if you like, although we connect very much with the neighbors around, like Minu, and so in that micro level, there are like 3 other farmers around, elder men, as usually it happens with the countryside in Europe, and then we constantly support each other, for example, and it's beautiful because there was, as I said, it was like traditionally a private space way of running things, but also communal in a sense of, for example, many works were done commonly. So when we cut the hay, we will go to help them, and then they will come to help us, and so on. So that's part of the everyday of the day. We, for example, now Laureano is going to eat with the neighbors because they were invited, or the other day we invite them. So that's constantly happening. And then there is the village down there, which is a bit bigger, it's 100 inhabitants. And with them we are reactivating a sort of a village association. And now we are working in a contest that is an award called the Exemplary Village. So that's an excuse to get people to just come together and think what makes a village exemplary, and then the aspects of mutual aid and so on. But in general, everybody and the elders, they realized that was a big thing here that has decreased very, very much. The aspects of communal works were key, and now it's less and less.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I don't mean. I think that also the difficult part, for example, in an entity, in an association, regarding decision-making process, is the processes of inclusiveness, in the sense like when you arrive to something, you cannot be immediately in the same decision-making level than somebody who has been. So that's also something that contrasts with what we would think about total horizontalism. And that I learned, for example, in the shepherd school. When a young student of shepherd go to with the shepherd, it's not going to be a horizontal relation, because it's more that you are a little, how do you say, grumete? Grumete is like the young person in a sheep. So in a sheep, there is like a hierarchy. No? There is the captain or whatever. Is that inherently bad? I'm not sure, because it's like a sort of a extreme condition situation. And when we go to the mountains, it's like a similar situation. You are with the captain, that is the shepherd, and when he says like, let's get this sheep, let's do this and that, you just kind of follow. And I thought that how the guild was somehow. The guild, involved that you would be working with a master, for example, I don't know, a wood carpenter, no? And I don't know how much space for horizontality was left in that situation. Actually, why we don't paint this way, Michelangelo? No, it was like, I want this pigment, and this is the master. And there's the chance to learning, and the chance of living, and the chance of opposing and saying, I don't think you do well, I just do it better. And that's a way of progressing. Then the horizontality happens in other ways, between shepherds, the commons. So yeah, I don't know. It's just that learning that in life there are different ways, of engaging and I don't know.
I want to pick up on something that you said just now, which was about the fact that in this hamlet that most people are older men.
Yes. Single men.
The shepherd school, if I'm right in thinking, is aimed at younger people, right?
Although we try not to
distinguish.
Yeah. We just say anybody interested. And we are now experimenting in something that is interesting. Is that in the past we were saying anyone interested with enough capacity, physical capacity, to endure being a shepherd in the mountains, which is very kind of, how to say, broad.
Yeah.
But it's really putting a limit, on who can be a shepherd. And now we are thinking and we are realizing that it's like a bit of an ableist proposition, because it's saying like only if you walk well in the mountains you can be a shepherd, which is partly true, because when you are up there, you need to move and it's very physical. But then we are trying to think on how they could be experiences for shepherding for people who are, for example, blind, and then we are working with the sounds of shepherding, and we'll bring hopefully a blind person who comes from a shepherding family. Or also we did activities with the flock in Madrid for people with cognitive diversity and autism. And so then about the age, of course, yes, I mean, anybody can apply. And sometimes we have people of 50 and 60 years old.
What kind of structure do you offer, and what's involved in the course?
So then there is a pre-registration period where people can pre-register. And then we do a formative class just to tell them how it works and how it is and so on. And then if they register, there is a month of theory. And before we were doing this, you have to move somewhere to do the theory, either to the space in Madrid or here. But then in COVID, we started to do it also online, and then we realized that many people can just do it online because they have other works and they cannot just sacrifice the month of May to be going to classes. I mean, that reduces the capacity of who you approach. You approach just then people who are maybe 19 years old, they finish their school, they don't know what to study, and they have a month to stay somewhere.
So outside of just age, thinking about how you might be able to create spaces for more marginalized identities.
Well, for example, programmatically, we give priority to women in the selection process for people from migrant background or of asylum seeker. So we have an agreement with CEAR, that is the Comisión Española de Ayuda al Refugiado, and then we have people from Ghana, from Morocco. Guillermo, actually, he came from El Salvador as asylum seeker in Spain, and then he did the shepherd school and decided to stay. And in Madrid, we also have people from that are like have to be sometimes in our space like 5 years and get a contract in order to get the papers. Then I guess that people come to shepherd school from diverse realities. The shepherds confront those other diversities, and then we navigate that or try to mediate on that. And then, of course, it's not easy, no? And I'm very much aware also of I'm in a situation in which being a man and being and so on don't suffer all those micro discriminations that one might suffer. The recent thing we want to do in the village is like a Creole garden of corn varieties, because in this region the corn became like a basic food, and this is because, of course, after America this was brought as a seed and it was growing very well, and then there are many traditional dishes that are based on corn. But then, of course, there are also the source of diversity of corn, no, is the whole Mesoamerica or the Andean region for the potatoes and so on. And now there is like let's say that there were many people from this region that went to America in the 20s. So there was a moment where they would be impoverished here and having difficulties to keep a big family, and they would be going to Venezuela, Argentina, Cuba, and sometimes they made a successful things there, and then they came back. And now there is a moment in which more people from Latin America are coming, and then that kind of back and forth path of exchange is what we would like to highlight in that Creole garden. It's just to normalize that there are people from other places are coming with other recipes, other ways of eating, other cultures, and try to mediate on what otherwise could be seen as just that there's somebody, a foreigner is coming and I don't know anything about that culture or that person.
Alongside being a shepherd, Fernando is an artist, and so the Inland project is not just about shepherding. At its base, it is also an artistic project which examines the role of territories, geopolitics, culture and identity in the relationship between the city and the countryside. The very establishment of the shepherd school and repopulating the abandoned village he lives in was a means to combine collective artistic and agricultural production. So I asked him to delve into how he moves from theory to practice in his artistic applications and how they connect to his shepherding and agroecological activism.
For me, it was very natural to connect art with the land. I think that at this moment the urgency is how we can put art to work, to re-enchant ourselves with what's around us, and especially with the land, and as it's needed. So I think it's really a tool for the empowerment of rural communities. There was an agroecologist researcher. He said that more than thinking on technical aspects as agronomics and production systems, and more than thinking on the economics and so on, for the transition community into an agroecology systems, we need to rethink the way in which we name things. And it's a cultural procedure, a cultural maneuver to reposition who we are, our identity, and how we relate with the land.
So that's with the new shepherd school building that we are repairing, and then there's the library and the classroom, and that's the summer bedroom, and this is the shepherd school students' house.
In 1994, a flock of sheep took to the centre of Madrid, led by Jesus Garzón. People gawped as thousands of merino sheep passed in and out of pavements and roads, typically frequented by hordes of vehicles rather than herds of livestock. A reminder that prior to being a runway of asphalt, this land was walked by shepherds moving their livestock through the country to reach their seasonal pastures. Jesus was raising awareness of a practice called transhumance, the seasonal act of moving livestock to and from summer highlands and winter lowlands, helping to avoid severe temperatures. In 1995, a law was passed by the Spanish government to protect the nationwide network of ancient paths historically utilised by shepherds to carry out this migration. These run across 125,000 kilometres, known as vías pecuarias in Spain, or livestock ways in English. The law declared them as public property and therefore imprescriptible, inalienable and inembargable. Ecologists also refer to them as ecological corridors, which can provide a refuge for plants and animals. In large part due to Jesus' desire to re-enchant Spain with its shepherding culture, a transhumance festival was born, and since his stunt in 1994, thousands of sheep pass through Madrid every year at the end of October. This event makes visible the neglected livestock pathways and the people still working with transhumant practices, not only in Spain, but across the world. Transhumance, which comes from the Latin trans for across and humus for earth, is thought to go as far back as the year 923. Its persistence is due to the people who continue traditions of pastoralism within a landscape of shifting land ownership structures. The European Shepherding Network states that land grabbing and the restrictions on mobility make it impossible to maintain a viable pastoralist system. Pastoralists live and work across Europe, from the Arctic tundra to the Mediterranean and Black Sea, from northern European lowlands to the mountains of the Alps and Carpathians. Herding cultures include crofters, transhumants, nomadic herders, and other extensive forms of livestock farming of sheep, cattle, goats, and reindeer, with the native, locally adapted breeds having an important role in these practices. Spain remains the only country with a network of legally protected roads for the movement of herds. Nevertheless, pastoralism encounters obstacles in many forms, including a crisis of generational renewal and diversity. In Spain, where rural depopulation is on the rise, some people are getting self-organised and offering each other mutual support and training opportunities to make pastoral livelihoods more accessible. This includes the Women's Livestock Farmers of Catalonia, which in 2018 was founded to promote extensive livestock farming from a feminist and anti-capitalist perspective. To promote the future of this relational livelihood, shepherding schools for exchanging knowledge and applied practices are growing in numbers, scales, and territories. Neoliberal market values are significantly influencing the food economies that shepherds have to compete in and make their living from. Intensive industrial models of raising livestock and transforming labour into produce for the market are challenged by many pastoralists who believe in a different cultural system of production in the countryside. Could new shepherd schools help make space for collective action, new modes of participation and transformation? Can they help us think through ways to reclaim ecological relationships of commoning when surrounded by enclosures both material and ideological? Today we're visiting Fernando Garcia Dory to talk through these ideas. Fernando is deeply engaged with rural traditions of shepherding. As did Jesus Garzón, he wants to demystify society to the careful relations between nature and culture, to challenge misconceptions around extensive modes of livestock farming. The interview took place in the luscious green mountains of northern Spain in a very old hamlet, where Fernando founded inland Campo Adentro. Its creation was based on a 3-word manifesto: art, agriculture, territory. His ecological pedagogy includes taking his flocks to towns and creating flock forest classrooms in cities.